Well, I have on the line a bloke you've most probably never heard of down here, Mick De Brenni. He's been the Minister for Housing and Public Works in Queensland since 2015. He's only 42. He's the member for Springwood, which is in Logan, sort of between Brisbane and the Gold Coast. And this apparently, landlord rubbish, is his baby. He's on the line. Minister, Mick, good morning.
Good morning, Alan. Thanks for having me on to talk about...
No, thank you for coming on. Thank you for coming on. Now, listen, can I ask you a simple question?
Mm-hmm.
Are you just ready to hand over your job come October and the election? Turn it in? Because this stuff's you can't stay in government going this way.
Well, it's great that I've got the opportunity to clear up a few of the things that you asked of the Prime Minister before. And, of course, we all know the Prime Minister announced, and I think it was the right thing to do on the 29th of March.
May I just interrupt you, Mick? I'm sorry. I'm not going to interrupt you, but I just want to say this. Now, yesterday I made what are very valid points because this has gone out to the Real Estate Institute. So landlords have been told the tenant will not have to pay back any rent. You can't ask your tenant for any proof of financial hardship. I've got the letter here in front of me. Landlord insurance won't cover you for rent in arrears. The tenancy agreement will extend by 6 months if it expires during the 6 months freeze on eviction. So moratorium on evictions, they won't pay rent for 12 months. And you can't inspect the property. The tenant can break a lease. You can't go into the property even if it's your own property. Now, before you say anything, the Queensland Deputy Premier and Treasurer Jackie Trad has the potential to make you a backbencher, not a minister, because you cannot win an election with this stuff and with rugby league and with the boys. You can't win an election, believe me, I've been around longer than you. She was quizzed about this landlord and tenant stuff. She was asked for opinion. The Treasurer, do you mind? She said she'd not yet seen draft legislation. Now, this is going to be passed in the Parliament on Wednesday. Jackie Trad said the government wanted to protect renters and support owners. She said, I haven't even seen, these are her words, the draft legislation at this stage. What the hell's going on? This is your bunny. Has she, your treasurer, the deputy leader, has the Premier seen this?
Every cabinet minister will see the draft
legislation before it goes. Have they seen them yet?
They will. They haven't seen it yet, but they're about to see it. And it's good that we've had the opportunity to work through some of these issues with both tenants and property owners. You know, obviously the nation and our state has been focused on saving lives. We understand this renting stuff is really about saving livelihoods. And, Alan, I think you know Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk quite well, and her focus is always on making sure that people come first. And in this circumstance, that's got to be both the property owners and their tenants as well. And so
can I ask you them questions? Let me just ask you some questions. Please. You can answer yes or no. Is it right that the tenant will not have to pay back any rent? So a rent reduction negotiated with the tenant will be a permanent rent waiver. Is that right?
There'll be no permanent arrangements about any of this whatsoever.
Well, that's what the document says.
Measures. I understand what the document says, and we're working through with the Real Estate
who wrote the
Institute
document?
of Queensland today. I think the Real Estate Institute of Queensland wrote that one. But the Residential Tenancies Practice Guide, which is still under development, and I'm hoping to finalise that with the Real Estate Institute in just a couple of hours. I'll be meeting with them today.
Good.
We'll address some of these concerns, and it will provide information to everybody in the system to how to work their way through these very...
Okay, let's come back. Mick, we'll just come back to the question. So you're saying that's not right. The tenant will not... That won't be legislated, that the tenant will not have to pay back any rent. So a rent reduction negotiated with the tenant will not be a permanent rent waiver.
There's no permanency about the regulations that we're putting in place. They're all about implementing the National Cabinet's decision for 6 months. We know that most
the National Cabinet decision said, Mick, the National Cabinet decision said existing lease arrangements must be honoured unless there is appropriate negotiation.
Indeed, and that's exactly the framework that we'll...
So can you ask your tenant for any proof of financial hardship?
Absolutely. You can ask for proof of financial hardship, and so we think it's really reasonable that you look at things like Centrelink information if they're on one of the welfare packages that have been announced by the Commonwealth, a separation certificate if they've lost their job as well. What we have said, though, that we don't think it's reasonable that you hand over your full bank statements. However, and this is really important, you will have to provide those to the Residential Tenancies Authority if you want to have them assist you conciliate an agreement with your landlord. So It's just about providing some protection of sensitive information, but we think basic information is fair to be able to provide to your landlord.
Okay, let's come to it, because this is Wednesday. Are you going to put this... I don't believe this. You're going to put this into the Parliament on Wednesday and Jackie Trett hasn't seen it.
Well, I think, in normal circumstances, you'd work through this sort of legislative reform over 6 or 12 months. We've had to pull together a package, like just as every other state has, in a matter of a couple of weeks. And this is uncharted territory for everybody.
But you will honour that. Right. You will honour the thing that the Prime Minister said: existing lease arrangements must be honoured. So someone can't automatically say, there's a moratorium on evictions, therefore I don't have to pay rent.
Oh, absolutely. Our firm position is if you've not been evicted by income loss, then you should continue to pay your existing rent.
Well, you've got some damage to make up, Mick. You've got some ground to make up, because this is an election loser, full stop. My correspondence is monumental. Monumental from all parts of Queensland.
You see my inbox too, Alan.
Right.
Quite the same, I think.
Well, okay, the tenancy agreement will immediately extend by 6 months if it expires during the 6 months freeze on evictions. So does that mean the tenant will automatically be entitled to a 6-month extension of the tenancy agreement? And because there's a moratorium on evictions, the tenant can say, I'm not going to pay rent. What's the landlord do?
There are no positions in which we think it's okay for people to say, I'm not paying any rent. We think it is appropriate, if they've lost their job, to enter into negotiations, and if they can't make a resolution, then we'll assist them with mandatory conciliation. I think the intent of National Cabinet was that during the period of the public health emergency, that they didn't want people moving home or being forced into homelessness. And so I think the intent was to see that through until probably 30th of September. Right. And so when we announced our framework last week, we talked about rolling over tenancies for 6 months. And that's on the basis that the tenant has met their obligations, been a good tenant. And so we'll clarify.
Can the tenant refuse to allow the owner entry to the property for anything other than emergency repairs?
We think that tenants have a right to refuse entry only on this very important basis if they're self-isolating or self-quarantining because of medical reasons. However, we think there's a whole range of digital practices that are being adopted by the Australian public at the moment. Everyone's on Zoom conferences, people are FaceTiming. There's no reason under these circumstances where an inspection couldn't be done virtually, and that's part of the guidelines that we're addressing. Okay,
so you're going to meet in a couple of hours with the real estate people. Do you understand that the people are ropeable? Because I could talk to you for an hour here. So when will you have a draft of this so that I'm happy to help sell your story if it's a fair story. When could I see a draft?
We think that this will be considered by our Cabinet when it next meets, which will be well in advance of the Parliament. And I'm really confident...
Is this going to be legislated next Wednesday, yes or no?
Well, yes, it will be. So there's a few pieces to this, Alan. There'll be a legislation which authorises me to make the guidelines. We want to keep the guidelines flexible so that we can address concerns raised by property owners and tenants, because the public health emergency, the nature of it is changing, and we won't necessarily be able to go back to Parliament. And so what we announced last week was a legislative framework to enable me to make a practice guide. That practice guide is still in negotiation, and we're working through that today. And we've listened to everybody in this.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I just kind of stress to you, this is an election loser. When you put it alongside, people won't forget, Mick. They won't forget. Now, what on earth is Queensland doing about rugby league? I haven't got time to go into the detail, but can I say to you, there are some experts in Queensland apparently who know better. Volandis has put on the table, and Peter Beattie, your Premier, former Premier, the advice, biosecurity advice that says we will make sure all health requirements are honoured. Where is your government's advice that says no rugby league in Queensland, no state of origin? This is an election loser. Now, you're a mad rugby league bloke. Have you got any clout in the cabinet?
The sports minister as well.
I know.
Also the sportsman as well. So I've got my hands full.
Well, are you going to belt someone's head in here? Come on.
Oh, look, I think the tension is between meeting all of those challenges around the biosecurity measures and the instructions of the chief medical officer. I'm very confident if there can
They've
be
all been signed off by Volandis. I mean, you've made your government a categorical statement: no rugby league, no state of origin. You haven't put on the table the health justification for that position, and you're flying in the face of Peter Beattie and Peter Volandis, who say We have the health information. We will not be putting anyone's health at risk. Why have you made this explicit statement, no rugby league, no state of origin, and can you change it?
Well, I think I might have rubbed the Queensland Origin coach up the wrong way yesterday when he said that he doesn't make the rules around where and when Origin be played. The NRL does, and I said, well, I think actually the Chief Medical Officer does. And I think it's all about a matter of timing. If we can have some flexibility around when the Origin will be played, I think we'll be able to reach a resolution. I
tell you what, Mick, you've got some work on your hands, because now, I'll tell you what, if they had a vote tomorrow, you're gone. You're gone. You're a backbencher. Believe me. This is political dynamite. This stuff about rent, landlords and rugby league. Can we talk next week before Wednesday?
Yeah, I'd be really happy to do that.
Good to talk to you. Thank you for your time. That's the Housing Minister, Mick De Brenni. Might be getting somewhere, do you think? 22 after 8.